So it's still morning, so good morning to everybody. And what a great handoff from that earlier panel, which really set us up beautifully for the discussion of regulatory challenges. And for me, it's a pleasure and privilege to introduce this really expert panel, international experts who have a lot to say on various aspects of the regulatory piece in maritime cybersecurity. So the previous panel set us up beautifully. They also got dangerously close to talking about the regulation, but we're going to go into more depth. So since these four people are the stars of the show, I'm going to introduce them right away and only then provide a few sentences to frame what we're about to address over the next 40 minutes or so. So we have Dr. Melanie Garson. I'm going to read from your bios if that's okay. Dr. Garson is Cyber Policy and Tech Geopolitics lead at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which is already interesting and probably a whole discussion in and of itself. Her work focuses on cyber policy, the geopolitics of AI, wow, computing, quantum, and the internet, the rise of tech companies as geopolitical actors, and data governance, which you heard a little bit about in the previous panel, as well as the intersection of disruptive tech, foreign policy, defense, and diplomacy. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. Ronen Miroz is a friend and colleague, really happy to have him with us. He's a shipping and logistics industry veteran and currently the COO of MSC Israel. For over 20 years, Ronen has held leadership roles in maritime business development, corporate development and finance, and in global operations. And from working very closely with him in the past, I know he's got a lot of insight and a lot to bring into this room. Our third panelist, also a friend and colleague, Eliav is a cybersecurity expert with a focus on defending critical infrastructures, which is going to be really important for our discussion, and essential organizations in sectors such as health, transportation, water support, and domestic security at the national level. So he's a member of the INCD, and you could perhaps describe your role when you begin talking about your topics. And so thank you for joining us. So we'll have the Israeli national perspective. You're completely responsible for representing that. And finally, but certainly not that's an important stop, Colonel Warren Parker of the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, is the chairman, although I wouldn't have said you don't look retired to me. Chairman of the South Coast Cyber Center in Beaufort South, 30-year veteran of the Marine Corps. He's a graduate of the University of Maryland and Harvard University. As well, he graduated from the National War College in Washington, D.C. Really looking forward to these different perspectives that are becoming really important to a deeper understanding of the regulatory aspects of maritime security. So I'm going to keep my framing concise. You want to hear from the stars. I was talking to a few colleagues before this, and you'll feel my regulatory frustration when I start to talk about these issues. So there's a lot of exposure to cyber risk in maritime and logistics sector, as we heard quite frankly and with a lot of candor from the earlier panel. And it's risk that is, as we also understood, not terribly well managed. We're getting better, but we're not there yet. And regulatory responses, in my view, both at the international level and at the national level, are still slow and inadequate. So the IMO guidelines, originally from 2016, have been revised to the end of June 2022. I was recently at a conference that sort of whispered that there's another revision in the works, but they're guidelines, and they don't require maritime organizations to meet any specific benchmarks. It's much more of a voluntary situation. There are some standards. We heard from Nir Ayalon about its involvement with the standardization process. Standards are great, but again, there's an enforceability issue that we need to address. Some general cybersecurity standards, sure, but not maritime specific. So there's a whole issue of, on the one hand, lack of in my view, are really enforceable, sharp regulatory guidelines on the one hand, and the bodies to enforce them on the other. So again, comment on the national level. The national laws are doing a little bit better. The critical infrastructure pieces from NIS2. Singapore is an interesting new law that allows for a temporary designation of the critical infrastructure as a cyber-sensitive body that needs to be guided by the government, which is really interesting to look at. But I'm going to finish up my introductory remarks with a real sense of regulatory frustration, if I might call it that. And I'm hoping that our panelists, as we go through and hear their views, will cheer me up a little bit and bring some hope, both in terms of the substantive regulatory piece and the enforcement piece. So that's enough for me. Let's start with you, if we may. Dr. Garson, I see you have lots of notes. So could you address as you wish, but sort of as guiding points, current convergence of geopolitics, cybersecurity, and cyber-physical risks in the maritime sector, a small aspect of the way our world is being covered. Start with that and give us some of your thoughts and have a seat.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And with the challenge of optimism and then geopolitical risk and cyber, they don't quite go together right now. For me, there's a few key problems, three risks that we're facing. I think at the first level is a massive optics problem when we come to maritime cybersecurity, and there's almost been, we talk about a lot in cyber, we talk about sort of critical infrastructure, and the assumption that I feel when we're addressing this in geopolitics, that maritime security really gets pushed to the side, even though it's the fundamental basis of the liberal world order. And it's fundamental basis of our economic security and our cooperation that we rely on. And even in the UK, where, we're an island, you think this would be right at the forefront, when you see even, and to put this in perspective, what we're seeing with the anti-Israel marches, where you're getting a call out for support for the Houthis attacking on global shipping without any understanding of the commercial ramifications in an era of high cost of living, of what that is doing. So there seems to be almost sort of maritime security blindness over all of this. And even if you look at, we're coming up to an election, if you look at the strategic positioning, this is not front and center of many of the national security and defense policies that we're seeing from either party. So that's one level. At the same time, we're in this era of, the axis of upheaval, the sort of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea sort of threats all converging. And but also within that picture, we've put commercial shipping, and particularly with the sanctions picture, right? So commercial shipping has been part of our sanctions enforcement, particularly in relation to Russia-Ukraine. Put them right on the front line without really thinking about have we empowered and enabled the defense of that sector at the same time. So when you've heard like shields up on critical infrastructure, particularly on the infrastructure in the different domains, I also think that's a big forgotten part of the conversation. Where are the enforcers of some of these sanction regimes? How have we put them there? And have we provided the support to be able to do that? Simultaneously, we've got this convergence of a number of tools. Of course, we're going to hear about over the next couple of days even here, everybody want to build more sharper sort of sexy AI-enabled capabilities on everything that we're sitting on, and again, that under that systemic support of it, not quite there. Then just for a really quick moment, and it was mentioned before in the earlier panel on the satellites, on the LEOs, I'm thinking about, because when I talk about cyber and cyber-physical risk and who are the players in the geopolitical system, of that now the sort of consolidation of that entire communication system into increasingly private hands, and where those tech companies that are the underpinning of the resilience. So it's very nice to incorporate, satellite comms tech, but who's our backup in that system? And if it's in the hands of one very quixotic individual, that's not great resilience indeed. That's me being polite in the sector. So that's really, and so that thinking about that risk analysis with the pipeline, where do you make more resilience on that? And the last bit I'll add to that is we're talking from very educated perspectives. If you look at who's in this room, at the Institute, we work across 40 countries worldwide, large amount of them emerging digital economies, a lot of them working with super legacy or second-hand equipment that are nowhere near the capabilities that we're even talking about, even thinking about that, and thinking about how we're making sure that this actually, we talk about cyber as a team effort, is genuinely a team effort across all sectors. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Really
with my optimistic picture.
Yeah, really interesting. And just to put a spotlight for a moment on the fact that we're talking without even blinking an eye about the interdependencies of the maritime sector and the satellite sector and the outer space sector, which was not true 3-4 years ago. No one was really looking at that. Now it's really front and center of the conversation. So thank you for mentioning that for your other points. We're going to turn now to Ronen Meroz, who will, Ronen, I'd like to ask you to start out with a few minutes on the different moving parts of the regulatory picture. So we've got shipping companies, we've got ports, we've got logistics companies, land-based. I can talk about the satellite part if you want as well, but how do these different regulatory pieces fit together in your view? Or do they fit together?
Okay, so first of all, let me fully agree and echo what you mentioned about the optics and the lack of regulation. With a small optimistic comment in the end. If you ask me the same question, let's say a couple of years ago, we would be in a completely different place. There was hardly any regulation in place. The only regulatory requirements were based on the IMO, International Maritime Organization Directive from 2017. But today we see some progress. I want to make the distinction between the various components of the industry. We cannot look at it as a whole. There are a few segments. One is the shipping companies, the companies that are actually moving the cargo of the people from one port to the other and operate the vessel. The second is the ports. As far as I know, most of them are stationary. They usually belong to countries, and they serve as gateways into countries. And the third part is everything else. The maritime or the shipping supply chain is very, very complicated. There are a lot of players that most of the people are not aware of, like customs agents and clearance and freight forwarders and what have you. And today they control and manage significant part of the global trade. And this segment is completely unregulated and mostly private. And it's up to us, the users, the shipping companies, the ports, and the importers and exporters, to be our own regulators, to implement supply chain risk management, and to make sure that all those unregulated parties are adhering to our cybersecurity standards. If we go back to the shipping and the ports, so the main differentiation, in my opinion, is that shipping regulations are mostly international, while the regulations and the guidance on cybersecurity for ports are mostly local, national, maybe continental if we are talking about Europe. So this is the main difference. I think also for ports, most of the countries identified long ago that ports are extremely important, and the local security agencies, together with the ports, have for years now started to work on the cybersecurity programs in the ports. I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but I think it's a reasonable generalization. While when we are speaking about shipping, it's sort of a transparent industry, like Melanie said. It's going very slow at 15 knots or 18 knots, and the regulation is even slower. So you have the IMO, which published a baseline, but by optimism I meant the class societies. These are the most important factors today on cybersecurity in the industry. Class societies are non-governmental agencies that are issuing standards. It's not legislative, it's not regulation. But in the end of the day, if you are a vessel operator and you want to operate the vessel and have your vessel insured, you must comply with their directives or guidelines. And recently they published 3 very important guidelines concerning cybersecurity. Obviously, they are more relevant for the new built vessels, and this is another problem. I keep opening parentheses, I'm sorry, I'll close, because we also have a lot of 20, 25, 30-year-old vessels with very old systems that simply cannot adhere to these directives. But again, to conclude, the class societies today are the main players. When the regulation is very, very basic, they are the main players who are pushing the cybersecurity standards for the vessels.
Thank you so much, man. That was a really good perspective, and you reminded me. Thank you for the correction on the date of the IMO regulation. So you got the date right, I know. But you also brought in the insurers as sort of the back push regulators and enforcers, which is a really important piece of the action for ships, for maritime, and even for the humans, for the people who are employed on ships and in ports and otherwise all throughout the supply chain. So that's a really important issue. I think we'll get back to that later. Sure. Thanks a lot. So let's move on to Eliav and Noori. Eliav, could you talk to us about the ways that the INCD and other organizations that you know manage that enforcement piece, even perhaps without regulation? The more practical aspects, and to the extent that you're willing to share the Israeli example, the Israeli maritime sector and cooperation that you have with other countries, that would be excellent.
Okay, thank you for the question. Before I answer, I'd like to move out from the discussion and talk about this yellow strip we are all wearing on our necks. 120 people are still in captivity in Gaza, and we all have to remember them. Although we're sitting in this air-conditioned and nice place, well, we have to remember them, and from every state say to the government, to the Gazans, bring them home now. So, INCD is the national agency for cybersecurity in Israel, and we are developing methodologies and bringing best practices and assessing the market in order to understand the cyber posture of in Israel. As for the maritime sector, surprisingly, we don't have any cyber regulations or cyber act. The transportation sector in Israel has 4 types of organization: critical infrastructures, essential bodies, and all the rest, which are divided into type B and type C organizations. So I'll talk later about the critical infrastructure, but as for shipping companies, as for private ports, there are no regulations regarding to cybersecurity. So what we do in the absence of cybersecurity regulation is to bring all the actions we do at the national level to the maritime sector, mostly voluntarily. For example, we do a lot of collaboration with the industry. I mean, there are a lot of public-private initiatives. There is, for example, in Ashdod port, a place where you can do pilots with the port. So when you are making this collaboration with the industry, you're increasing the awareness of cybersecurity. Another way to make a better cybersecurity without regulation is, for example, facilitate information sharing, right? The INCD every day publish new threats, new IOCs, lots of papers. Sometimes they are just papers for the normal person in order to learn and understand the risks from cyber. We promote a lot of awareness and education by doing public campaigns, lots of tabletop exercises, lots of training programs. All this from the national level without any regulation. So if a shipping company wants to be part of it, then they are welcome, and we are support them to keep and understand the risks. As for critical infrastructures, then as you all know, Israel is a geopolitical island. I mean, as we are located in not the best neighborhood, 98% or so of our import goods are based on the sea. So the Israel government many years ago understood and designated the two main ports and the national community system as critical infrastructure. Therefore, this organization and this system, the community information system, brings a lot of regulations, but as a critical infrastructure. I mean, the electricity company and the ports mostly have the same demands from the states for cybersecurity, which brings an advanced risk management, enhanced regulatory oversights, priority to access to resources like IR teams, national level IR teams, technical assistance, a lot of threat intelligence, which is focused on the organization themselves, and many other actions we do in order to to bring better cybersecurity. I'll stop here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's okay.
It was either a note or a finger, so thank you very much. Just a little bit of taste of the Israeli view of maritime as critical infrastructure, and what I would. I mean, there's so much to talk about there as fronting the addressing critical infrastructure, and then sort of drawing back to particular sectors. I think is a really interesting regulatory pattern that Israel has really pioneered, I think.
Yeah.
So that's really good to hear about. Thank you very much. And part two, tabletop exercises, do them. Yeah, they're really effective.
Yeah. Three years ago, if you remember, we were set together in a panel in Ashdod. And
with Ronen, actually.
I was the moderator, and I asked you for the last question, what do you think is going to be the best way to implement cybersecurity within the maritime sector? Do you remember your answer?
No, you're really putting me in a hard place. I don't remember anything anymore.
You said one word: sanctions.
Which, thank you for remembering. It's a collective memory situation. And that's a missing piece of the puzzle right now.
And this is the missing piece. Yeah. Because even for critical infrastructure in Israel, we don't have sanctions. They have to do it by law, but if they don't do it, okay, we'll go to court and then...
you can take away a license or two, but I don't think it's ever been done. So, thank you for that. Lots of work still to do. And we're going to end up, we're already beyond time, but I wish we had another 2 hours. And our final speaker is Colonel Warren Parker. Colonel Parker, would you share with us Any observations that you have kind of this not working? At the more strategic level and given your experience, sort of the longer term of where you think we're headed with regulatory priorities and with enforcement priorities.
Okay.
And or anything else you'd like to add. So you have, we're going to take 4 or 5 minutes, if you will.
Well, first of all, I was when I got the invitation to come here, I was really excited to come. Some people said it's too dangerous to come. I said it's too dangerous not to come,
Wow.
and I appreciate the opportunity. More people stand with you than you would think from the news that's reported on television. Now to the really what I think is a existential problem for the maritime transportation system and our ports, ships, everything that makes it up. This is a very fragile system. We saw during COVID how it simply fell apart. We saw ships backed up, 60, 70 ships backed up at Long Beach, ports all over the country in the United States. A mess. It's a fragile system made up of all of these disparate parts which really don't fit together. And you have everything, for instance, in the United States, you have everything from the mom and pop trucking company that has 2 trucks and a Windows XP laptop sitting on the front seat of the truck, which is hooked into the scheduling system at the port. Well, guess who else is hooked into the scheduling system? The shipping companies, Maersk, the ports, the security, the Department of Homeland Security, Customs, you name it. Where would I go to get into your system? Can't be that hard. We right now, in our little neck of the woods, are exploring some grants from the National Science Foundation related to the maritime transportation system and maritime cybersecurity. And what we have found, I think I go back to the fragility of the system, but what you've also found as we've kind of started to explore the thing over the last 2 years is arrogance and complacency. And I will tell you that on this battlefield, as on other battlefields, arrogance and complacency will kill you. And that is a lot of what we have in the maritime transportation system, I'm afraid. The president just issued an executive order on maritime cybersecurity. It was good, had some good principles in it, some good ideas. But when you boiled it down and got to the very end of it, it was about cranes and the software in the cranes and who was going to make the software.
Yep.
That's not a national solution to maritime cybersecurity. And I think all the things that have been said here today are correct. But accountability at the CEO level is what's going to eventually solve this problem. The financial crisis back in 2008, when you start to hold CEOs of companies, CEOs of ports, owners of these companies responsible for what goes right and what goes wrong, then they will begin to pay attention to the problem. It's not going to be solved by more software or by having different companies make the same software but put the same person behind that software who's untrained and is vulnerable to all of the breaches that we see almost on a weekly basis right now. So that's my assessment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Colonel
That may
Parker.
be a little more pessimistic than.
Thank you for your good words, and also driving home the regulatory point to the issue of sanctions and enforceability. In the broader context of cybersecurity enforcement regulation, I think you're really, sadly perhaps, right that corporate accountability is a really big part of the enforceability picture. And we're seeing that a little bit more in Europe. In Israel, we're not there yet. But in the US, and this isn't beyond our scope, but for SEC reporting and public companies really needing to step up and do their cybersecurity reporting, whether they're maritime companies or in other sectors, that seems to be making a difference. So maybe a little sliver of light on our maritime horizon. Thank you all for your attention, and thank you, panelists, for the really, really good insight. Have a good rest of conference.